My name is Jay Hennessy, and I work with the Cleveland Indians. It's a baseball team. Unlike many people here, though, I don't have a background in medicine. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a sports scientist. I didn't play baseball. And in fact, before my current role, I had absolutely no experience in professional athletics. Previous to this job, for 25 years, I did something significantly different. So how does a guy that spent 25 years as a Navy SEAL end up getting hired by the Cleveland Indians? That was the question I asked of my boss when I was interviewing. And the answer was kind of surprising. It was all about someone that could take a different look at the organization, someone that could ask different questions and wasn't tainted by experience in the sports world. So I thought, okay, well, that seems like a fit. But the learning curve was steep. Entering a new world outside the military, there was a ton for me to learn. The great news was the Cleveland Indians do a great job of telling stories. And there's two stories in particular that helped me kind of get my bearings and lay a foundation for what I was going to pursue over the past 18 months. The first story, right from the hiring process, my boss shared about the 2016 World Series between the Cleveland Indians and the Chicago Cubs. The story is really less about baseball and more about the organization just taking a pause and reflecting on what was happening, where were they, who was the organization. And a couple of things jumped out at them that made them realize what our organizational challenge is. For one, Cleveland is a small market team. One of the challenges is we have two other professional sports teams in the city. We've got football and basketball, not to mention other professional sports teams in the surrounding area. The demographics of our city make it challenging as well, as things like unemployment, median household income really make the challenge exacerbated. What it ends up with is when we looked across the field, the other organization was like so many other organizations that we compete with, a $300 million revenue gap every year, which drives the numbers 75-25. So that took me a minute to understand. And what they said was, in 2016, and every year since, our major league lineup, 75% of our at-bats come from our own player development program. Now, for many of you here, that may not sound surprising, so I'll add a little bit of context. For many of the other large organizations that we were competing, they only have 25% that are coming from their development programs. The reason that's important is it shows other organizations can buy their way out of trouble. They can spend to get their talent. But for the Indians, that's not what works. We need to win differently. We need to win grittier. And we like to think that we do that by the power of team. We out-team our competition. The second story that they shared with me was really one that I've kind of retold, and it was how I understood what the organization is. And we're really a baseball university. We've got our admissions department, that's our amateur and professional scouting, our international scouting, and then our 7 minor league affiliates, our minor league teams, comprise of different levels of an education, from junior college all the way up to our major league doctoral students. And we say students because we're all learning. Everybody's trying to get their competitive edge. Everybody's trying to compete. And of course, our coaches are referred to as our professors, and we look at that as our overall baseball university. So joining the organization and understanding what the challenge was and understanding how we were organized, I was charged with, as my boss said, help make us better. So my partner in crime in learning and development came up with an approach to really understand the organization. And this is the part that I think is important. We decided that we were going to go out and meet every single coach, every single scout, and get to the heart of what makes them great, what makes them great at what they do. And we put a fancy banner on it. We called it the Model of Excellence. And the idea was that we would bring them in, small groups of 3 or 4 at a time, and just ask them a couple simple questions. What are you doing when you're at your best? What do you do? What do you aspire to be in this organization? And what we hoped was, after speaking with all of our scouts and all of our coaches, we'd come up with a model of excellence for scouting and coaching. And that document would be our kind of a reference point for how we could bring in development. So that was kind of our thought. When we went into it, we just came up with 4 tenets. When we were going to meet with our folks, we said, we're going to go in with curiosity, let them have the floor. This part was the easiest because we weren't from baseball, so we were genuinely curious. We said we were going to have unconditional positive regard, and by that we meant we were going to hear things that we weren't expecting, and we would be non-judgmental. The third thing is we were going to take an appreciative approach. We knew that if we asked the coaches, what's wrong with our coaching program? If we asked our scouts, what's wrong with scouting? We'd get pages and pages of our problems. What we wanted to know was what we're doing when we're at our best. And we wanted this process to set us up in a way that we could iterate with our coaches and scouts continually throughout the year. So that's what we did. In groups of 3 or 4, we brought them into a small conference room and asked them, what are we doing when we're at our best? And what was shocking was immediately after we asked the question, the first guy, a little hesitant to answer, and then once the first answer came out, it was like electric. People were super energized. They were passionate. It was like they finally had a forum to communicate the great things they were doing. We asked them questions like, who's the best scout you've ever worked with? Who's the best coach you've ever worked with? What are they doing? And what we quickly noticed was, while our plan was to capture their data, put it together, and use it as a document, what was actually happening was the development was happening right there in the room. The development was a group of men sitting around the table sharing when they've seen themselves and their peers at their best. And while we were capturing notes to put this document together to circulate, we noticed that everybody else was taking equally as many notes as we were. And it was that energy. It was guys building off of each other's comments. Comments like, hey, and to build off of Jim, yeah, I saw the same thing. And then you could see guys being really reflective on like, I didn't think about that. And as we just kind of stepped back, that room just kind of took over in its own development. So as we watched the first and second session, we realized this is something that we have to continue doing. Overall, what ended up happening was we had great discussion, we had great dialogue, and we did pull the document together. We did end up with a product that highlighted the things that our scouts and coaches were doing when they were at their best. But the magic wasn't the document. The magic was bringing that group of people together, asking good questions to stimulate their own reflection, to stimulate their own learning. The second thing was, the reflection drove co-creation. It was this group of coaches, they weren't being developed, they were doing the developing. And that was powerful as we continued to iterate around the organization and hear further stories of what energized the team. The third one is probably the one that has stuck with us the most, and it's one that we got from Mark Manella, who many of you may know from KIPP schools, and it's who's ever doing the work is doing the learning. Too often times, at least in our organization, we looked at what we could do to develop our coaches, what we could do to develop our scouts, and we realized that oftentimes that's just not the way it's happening. That's not how adults learn. But when you bring them in and they are part of the process and they are part of the development, that's when the real magic happens. The fourth thing that we found was the stories were the secret sauce. The stories were the stories of that coach that had a special way of caring. And then when you dug a little bit deeper, you found that, yeah, he kind of pulled you aside before practice, and he knew what made you tick. He treated the 25th guy just like the 21st guy. It was the stories that each guy that was part of that session would remember. They wouldn't remember that we came up with 3 things of coaching, making the connection, baseball knowledge, and teaching, what they remember was Terry Francona talking about the story where focus on what they can do, not focus on what they can do, and giving an example of sending guys back down to AAA. The final thing is the power of co-creation. As we continued, so we put that document together, and then throughout the season, we would visit each affiliate and tee it back up again and share what the other affiliates, what the other coaches and other scouts in the industry had communicated. And this is where we found guys being super energized to hear what guys in other parts of the organization. So for many organizations, when we're spread out from the Dominican Republic to Arizona to Cleveland, it's hard to have those connections. But when we brought people together and we shared those stories, that was super powerful for us. I'd be remiss if I didn't share a few of our favorite works that influence kind of how we look at learning and development, how we look at adult learning. And as we talk about culture, the book in the center, Culture Code, would be, if I could recommend one book, that would be it. The final thing I want to leave you with is, I think oftentimes when we come to conferences like this, we find ourselves going speaker to speaker, conference to conference, and we really take time to really process what it is we captured. So what I challenge you for the rest of the day is, for each presentation you hear, figure out what the 2 to 3 things that you've thought about that were most relevant. What did you get out of it? What did that presentation make you think about? And then think about the one thing that would apply in your environment. What's the one thing that you can take action at? And of course, can't finish something on baseball without good game. So thank you very much for your time.
Okay.